Hi, my name is Mason. I'm 39 years old, and 5 minutes before I stepped into my own kitchen, I already knew something was wrong. Before I get into it, I want to hear from you. If you walked into a family meeting that felt more like a trap, what would you do? Drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from and whether you draw a hard line or try to negotiate. I'm curious how many of you have been pushed to accept something for the family that violated your gut. Friday is usually chaos for me. I own Alder Performance Motors, 3 locations, high-end European work, the kind of shop where a Saturday can pay a month's mortgage if you're ready for it. By late afternoons, I'm normally torque-wrench deep in service tickets, printing parts orders, getting the loaner cars cleaned, and texting customers who want their weekend showpiece ready by dawn. But that Friday, Harper, my wife, called at lunch. Her voice had that bright, two-even tone people use when they've been rehearsing. "Can you come home a little early?" she asked. "We need to talk, it's important." It always amazes me how 4 words, "we need to talk," can turn a successful man into a sock full of nerves. I'm not proud of that, but I'm honest. I wrapped things up by 4, tossed the keys to my manager, and drove home with that taut wire feeling running from my chest to my shoulders. Let me give you the basic cast, so what happens next makes sense. I'm Mason Alder, grease under the nails since I was a teenager, opened my first bay at 21 because the only European specialist near us charged the sort of prices that make rich people blink and pay anyway. My great-uncle left me a slice of land years later, 3.5 acres tucked down a long gravel drive, and that's where I built our house after Harper and I got married. We've got 2 boys, Jackson is 12, Miles is 10. Jonah, my father-in-law, is the steady one, a partner at an accounting firm, practical, decent. Simone, my mother-in-law, is, let's be charitable and say, opinionated. She thinks I'm clever with a wrench, but not good enough for her daughter. She likes polished people, courtroom voices, and cufflinks. Which brings me to Brent, my brother-in-law by marriage, trial attorney, big presence, self-satisfied grin, and Savannah, Harper's younger sister. Years ago, Savannah had a medical issue that meant pregnancy wasn't in the cards. That's not gossip. That's a fact the family lives with and never names aloud. The result is a house full of elephant and nobody points to it. Over the past year, the topic of how do we get Savannah a child started showing up at Sunday dinners like an extra guest. I suggested adoption once, gently. Simone shut that down so hard the air felt thinner. "I want my grandchildren," she said like she was placing an order. Jonah tried to reroute the conversation to surrogacy, hire a surrogate, use IVF, but even that got snagged in the thorns. Simone called anything with a lab coat cold and mechanical. She kept using the phrase, conceived in love. The first time I thought she meant a marriage. The 5th time I realized she meant something more literal. Meanwhile, 2 weeks before that Friday, Harper started moving like a person with a secret weight in her pocket. She'd drift into the doorway when her phone buzzed, face half-turned so I couldn't read it, shoulders tight when I walked by. We're not a policed phone couple. We've never had to be. But distance crept in, tired at bedtime, averted eyes at breakfast. That vague fog when someone's body is in the room and their mind is checking exits. If you felt that before, you know the spell. If you haven't, I hope you never do. I turned down the lane and spotted a cluster of cars glinting through the trees before the house came into view. I recognized Jonah's sedan and Simone's pearl-white SUV, Savannah's crossover, Brent's flashy thing, nose first like it owned the place. A couple of sedans I didn't clock. My stomach did that elevator drop it does right before bad news. Our house sits far enough off the road that a stranger wouldn't know we were home unless they knew where to look. Seeing that many vehicles tucked in felt like opening your calendar, and discovering you were volunteered for a party you didn't plan. I killed the engine before they could hear the garage door. An old habit, Jonah years back told me to carry a pocket recorder for meetings. Trust your memory, but back it up. I keep the recorder with my tape measure and a pen. It's as automatic as flipping off a light. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and thumbed it on. If you think that's paranoid, maybe it is. Maybe it's intelligent. I'll let you decide. I eased in through the utility room. Voices drifted like radio through a wall, muffled, too many at once. My boys weren't home, they were sleeping over at their friend, which was the only good sign in the scene. I opened the kitchen door. They were neatly arranged like a staged photo. Harper sat on the sofa with Jonah and Simone bracketing her, the dutiful daughter caught between the bookends. Savannah and Brent shared the love seat, knees angled toward each other. My brother-in-law Avery was slouched in the corner chair, trying to look invisible. 2 aunts, June and Kelsey, had pulled dining chairs in to round out the semicircle. And then, like a cherry on top, There was an office chair dragged in and parked opposite them, just far enough away to isolate whoever sat there. An empty chair made to look like an invitation. A lineup. "Hey, Mace," Harper said softly. "Come sit. We just want to talk through a few things and hear your thoughts." You know those moments when you look at your life from outside yourself? That was one of them. I could see the little stage they'd built and the part they'd written for me. Reasonable husband, supportive nods, maybe a stiff smile while I swallow something that tastes like copper. I walked past the orphaned office chair, grabbed a bar stool at the island, turned it around, and sat higher than everyone else. It wasn't about dominance, it was about oxygen. If you've ever felt a room tilt against you, you know you have to change the angle or you lose the air. I didn't speak, neither did Jonah. We just sat in that hum of kitchen appliance silence while everyone shifted. Harper picked at the seam of a cushion. Savannah offered me a bright, false smile I'd never seen on her face before. Brent's grin said, "I win arguments for a living." Simone folded her hands in her lap, chin lifted, the way people do when they've rehearsed a closing statement. Simone broke first. "We've been working on a solution to Savannah's situation," she announced, like a project manager unveiling a Gantt chart. "And we're ready to move forward." I looked at Harper, not at Simone, not at Brent, my wife, the person who knew how I took my coffee and the sound I make when a game goes into extra time and the way I double-check that the boys' soccer bags are zipped at the door even though they're big enough to do it themselves. She met my eyes for a heartbeat and dropped hers. I said nothing. Silence can be a pry bar. Harper swallowed. "You know how we've talked about surrogacy," she started. "Savannah's wanted to be a mom for so long and we want to help." "Of course," I said. My voice didn't carry any heat and that scared me more than if it had. Calm is either a bridge or an edge. Simone cut in. "We explored options, we did our homework. In vitro fertilization is cold, it's impersonal, it's not right for our family." She smiled in a way that was all teeth. "A child should be conceived in love." The phrase hit the table like a coin, too hard, too bright. I turned my head slowly to Brent. He shifted his weight, sat taller. Savannah squeezed his hand. Harper sat very still. "Say it plainly," I said. My voice surprised me, quiet like a held note. Harper's voice trembled. "I offered to carry the baby," she said. "For Savannah, it would just be for a time." She took a breath. "And Mom's right, we want it to be conceived naturally, so it would be Brent and me, for the sake of a child who would be theirs." There are moments in life when your brain doesn't know where to file the information. It's like trying to jam a live animal into a cabinet folder. I heard the words, they refuse to stick to reality. My first thought, embarrassingly, wasn't anger. It was the boys, who makes breakfast, who explains to Jackson why Mom's not home for a week while Uncle Brent is, who tells Miles why the grown-ups are whispering, who protects them from the rumor mill that will spin like a turbine the minute this leaks. "Walk me through your plan," I said, still too calm. "Actually use words, not euphemisms, not for the family. Pretend I'm the dumbest man you've ever met and you need to make it crystal clear." Simone lifted her chin. She loved a microphone. "Timing the cycle," she said. "Harper will be most fertile in 2 weeks. We'll set up a comfortable arrangement. Brent will be here. Conception should be private and beautiful. And then once the baby is on the way, Savannah and Brent will adopt. It keeps everything as it should be. Our blood, our name, our love." Harper's face flared pink. She put a hand on Simone's wrist like she wanted her to stop talking, but Simone only patted her fingers. "We are all adults," Simone added. "We can behave with grace." I looked at Brent. "You agree to this?" He did that lawyer tilt with his head, the one that says, "I'm about to talk and you will not like the flavor." "Savannah needs this," he said. "We've looked at the numbers. IVF isn't feasible for us right now, and frankly, it's not our value system." "Our value system," I repeated. "Your value system is my wife sleeping with you while my sons are down the hall and I make lasagna for the freezer." Brent's smile faltered. Savannah flinched like I'd snapped a rubber band across her arm. Harper wiped her palms on her jeans, small, nervous movements that broke my heart even as my anger rose to meet me. This is where I want to pause and ask you, at what point does helping turn into taking? Where's your border? If you've ever been told to swallow your discomfort for someone else's dream, did you swallow it? And what did it cost you later? Jonah finally spoke, voice tired. "Simone," he said gently, "we should slow down, we can't." Simone's eyes flashed. "We have been slow for years, Jonah. We are done waiting." She turned back to me, her smile snapping back into place. "Mason, you will of course support Harper through this. That is what a good husband does." My laugh was so soft it sounded like an exhale. A good husband protects his family, I said. Sometimes from the outside, sometimes from the inside. Harper's eyes brimmed. She tried to hold the room together with one look, pleading with me, appeasing her mother, reassuring Savannah. That's who she is, the glue. But glue only works when what you're repairing belongs together in the first place. Have you already started? I asked. Is that why you've been guarded? I didn't say the words no intimacy. I didn't need to. Harper took a breath like she was diving. I went off birth control 2 months ago, she whispered. I wanted to be ready if you said yes. There it was, the answer to a dozen little questions. The late-night bathroom trips, the phone in the doorway, the flat smile at bedtime. And you didn't think to ask me, before you rearranged my life and our children's lives, if I wanted to be part of this, I asked. You designed the stage, you invited the audience, you wrote me a line I'm supposed to deliver with grace. Did you leave me any choice at all? Savannah burst into tears. Brent put an arm around her shoulder and threw me a look that said I'd kicked a puppy. Simone leaned forward, energized by the chaos. Mason, this is bigger than your pride, she scolded. This is about family, blood, legacy. You will not stand in the doorway and keep a child from coming into this world. I slid off the bar stool and set my feet on the tile. Listen closely, I said, because I'm going to say this once and then this meeting is over. You are asking me to sanction infidelity and call it holy. You are asking me to explain to my sons that marriage vows are sturdy unless a grandmother has a dream. You are asking me to shred my self-respect so your Christmas card looks the way you imagined. The answer is no. Avery stood, palms out, like he expected me to flip the table. He has always been more talk than fight, and to his credit, he looked ashamed. Jonah rubbed his forehead like the beginnings of a migraine had found him. June and Kelsey found the edges of their handbags the way people do when they realize they've wandered into a fight that isn't theirs. Harper stood too, eyes shining. Mace, she said, voice barely there, I don't want to hurt you. I'm not trying to replace you or embarrass you. I'm trying to save my sister. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. I believe you love her. I believe you would set yourself on fire to keep her warm, but you're holding the match over my life, over our boys' lives. Nobody gets to call that love. Simone slapped her palm on her knee. Enough moralizing, she snapped. This will happen. You will either rise to the occasion or you will show us who you really are. I'm showing you, I said. Everyone out now. It wasn't a shout. Shouting is a loss of control, and I had more control than I'd had since I walked in. There's a moment when resolve tightens like a new belt, and you realize it's going to hold you up. Simone drew breath, no doubt to give me her finest closing argument, but Jonah stood and took her elbow. Come on, he said quietly. We're leaving. Brent stood like he was rehearsing an objection. You can't just... I can, I said. My house, my marriage, my sons. I looked at Savannah. I am truly sorry for your pain. I will help pay for a surrogate. I will drive you to appointments. I will be an uncle who shows up. But I will not be a husband who stands by while my marriage is turned into a loophole. Savannah nodded through her tears. It wasn't agreement. It was shock in a human body. Avery mumbled, let's go, and gathered the ants. Brent hesitated, peacock feathers drooping. He's used to rooms bending toward him. This one bent the other way. Jonah moved Simone toward the door. She tossed one last line over her shoulder. You're breaking your wife's heart, she said. You won't recover from this. I met her gaze. What I won't recover from, I said, is abandoning my own boundaries and calling it kindness. They filed out with the reluctant shuffle of actors who know the play is over but want one more scene. The door clicked. Silence returned, real silence, not the performative kind. Harper and I were the only ones left. The kitchen looked like the morning after a storm. Cushions askew, water rings on the coffee table, the stillness that follows a lot of wind. She stood with her hands twisted together, staring at the place where Simone had been sitting, as if her mother's outline might still be there to guide her. I need to say this clearly, I told her. Because I love you and because love without truth is just theater. If you move forward with that plan, our marriage ends. Not because I want to punish you, because I won't be able to live with myself if I say yes. She flinched like the words had weight. Can we talk later? She whispered. Just us, no one else. Later, I said, but not like this, not with your mom's script in your hand. I stepped into my office and closed the door. I pulled the recorder from my pocket and set it on the desk. The little red light blinked like a heartbeat. I didn't feel triumphant. The truth is, I felt hollow. You can do the right thing and still feel like you're falling through a trapdoor. Maybe that's the first lesson I can offer anyone watching. Boundaries don't always feel good. Often they feel like losing something you wanted to keep. But if you don't draw them, you lose yourself instead. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. I could hear Harper moving in the kitchen, a cabinet opening, a glass set down too hard on the counter. Somewhere in the distance, a car door closed and gravel crunched. The sun was low enough to paint a stripe of gold across the office floor. I thought about Jackson's soccer cleats by the door, about Miles's lopsided science project volcano still flacking red paint on the porch. I thought about the long road from who you think you are to who you actually decide to be. If you've ever had to choose between peace and self-respect, you already know the secret. There is no peace without self-respect. There is only quiet, and quiet can be a lie. I decided in that moment that whatever storm came next, I would rather walk into it upright than live under somebody else's umbrella and call it shelter. Later, Harper knocked. Later, there were more words, some soft, some sharp. Later, there were receipts and decisions, and a Friday I'll never forget. But that night, right then, I sat with the one truth that mattered. My answer was no, and I was going to live like I meant it. I shut the office door and let the quiet soak in, that post-storm hush where you can hear the house breathe. The recorder's red dot glowed like a tiny ember on my desk. I pressed stop, saved the file, and then did something that felt both paranoid and completely sane. I popped the battery, counted to 10, slid it back in, and started a new recording. If you've ever been blindsided in your own kitchen, you learn fast that reality has versions. I wanted mine preserved. I could hear Harper moving around, the clatter of a glass on the counter, cabinets opening a little too hard, closing a little too fast. That's her tell. She gets precise when she's rattled, like order can rope chaos. I stared at the ceiling. It looked exactly like it did the day before, which made me weirdly angry. How can the world stay put when your map has been ripped in half? There's a thing I set up years ago that most people would never think about until they need it. When Alder Performance Motors grew past one location, I invested in a proper customer system. Call recording, text archiving, the whole nine. We service expensive machines. You said, we said, can turn into thousands of dollars in parts. So every shop line, every WhatsApp tied to the business numbers gets backed up. A few years ago, when Harper started helping with scheduling part-time, we moved her number onto the company plan, and she signed the same paperwork as the managers. Communications get archived for quality control and legal compliance. It felt boring at the time, like signing up for a gym membership you may or may not use. That night, it was the difference between speculation and proof. I logged into the console, hands steady in that way they get when you're beyond panic and into focus. If you've ever had to collect yourself like that, eyes narrowed, breath even, heart packing itself on a metronome, you know it's a strange kind of calm. The filter popped up. I typed Harper's number. Then I typed Simon's, then Savannah's, then Brent. I hit search. It wasn't a trickle, it was a river. Call logs stacked like bricks. Voicemails, audio clips, screenshots from a group chat with a pink flower icon and a name that made me snort despite myself. Bloom. There it was, in months and weeks and minutes, the step-by-step of the conversation I had just been theatrically invited to bless. I opened the earliest message, 3 months back. Savannah had posted a crying selfie with the caption, "Bad day." Another negative. Simon's reply was a sermon. "A child conceived in love will have a soul that knows it." Brent added a thumbs up. Harper wrote, "I'll do whatever it takes." At first, it was about egg donation, who would carry which clinic, what financing. Then, right around the second week, the language shifted. Simone started using natural, with a capital N. Brent made a joke about old-fashioned, that I could practically hear through the text. Harper asked 2 medical questions and then stopped asking any at all. It reminded me of watching someone walk into the ocean at dusk and keep going, past the sandbar, past the point where they can feel the bottom. I listened to a voice note that made my knuckles go white. Simone, warm and conspiratorial. "Harper, sweetheart, we won't sterilize the miracle with machines. This child deserves to arrive the way God intended, through heat, not ice." Then Brent, lawyer smooth. "I'll take a week, sleep at the guest room, make it easy on the boys, quiet, respectful. We'll time it. It'll be gentle." Savannah chimed in a minute later, something like gratitude, something like apology, a tremble under every word. Harper's contributions were shorter. "I'm off the pill," one said. "Cycle changed," said another. There was one that made me want to throw the chair. "He'll be mad, but he loves me. He'll come around." Here's a question for you, because I want to know how other people's hearts solve problems their heads create. Have you ever found the exact proof of the thing you feared and felt both relieved and wrecked? Relief, because you're not crazy. Wrecked because confirmation doesn't cuddle you to sleep. I downloaded the whole thread to a folder, labeled it with the date and a name I wouldn't forget, then dragged the kitchen recording into the same directory. It felt clinical. A file name here. A timestamp there. Meanwhile, my marriage was a patient behind glass. If I could make the evidence tidy, maybe the pain would look tidy too. I texted Trevor, our corporate attorney, the steady guy who handled vendor disputes and lease renewals, and the one time a customer tried to claim we'd scratched a Ferrari we never touched. Need a family law referral. Urgent, I wrote. The dots bounced. Oh man, he replied. Call Lyle Stone. He's a hammer disguised as a velvet rope. He included the number and added a line I stuffed into my pocket for later. Whatever you do, don't make threats you can't carry out. Harper knocked once on the office door and swung it open without waiting. She had a glass of red wine she wasn't drinking and a face like she'd practiced calm in the mirror just to see if it would hold. We need to talk, she said, leaving the door cracked, standing in it like she might sprint if needed. She spotted the recorder on the desk in an instant. Really? She asked, not angry so much as weary. In our house. In our house, I said, where a committee just pitched me on stepping out of our vows and calling it charity. She closed the door and moved to the corner of the couch, tucking her feet under her, making herself small in the room we built to feel big. You're making it sound uglier than it is. It is ugly, I said. It's uglier than you think because you've dressed it up. You gave it white curtains and a catchy name, and you wrote me a noble husband line, but ugly in a tux is still ugly. She took a breath. Mace, listen, this isn't sex for sex, it's purpose, it's family. You know what Savannah has been through. You saw it eat her wifehood whole. I'm not trying to humiliate you. I'm trying to fix 10 years of a broken dream. That's the thing, I said. You're trying to fix somebody else's dream with my life, with our boys' stability, with our vows. You brought home a bulldozer and told me it's a bouquet. Her eyes flashed, the first spark of fury since the kitchen. Don't you dare compare me to my mother, she said. I hadn't said Simone's name, which told me some part of her had already done the math. This is my decision, mine. That's the other thing, I said, voice steady. You keep saying we decided, we planned, but the we never included me. You went off birth control. You scheduled a week of my absence from my own bed. You gamed out how to slide this through. You cut me out of the conversation about my marriage and then told me not to take it personally. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, the fury had gone. In its place was something worse, grief. I knew you would say no, she whispered. I knew it would be an ugly no. I thought, if I could put all the pieces in place, maybe you'd see it was already moving and you'd. Fold, I said. You thought I'd fold. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. There are moments in a marriage where the room fills with a third person you can't see. Not a lover, not a stranger, just the version of you that would be easier to live with. The pliable one, the quiet one, the one who lets himself be written. He stood next to me, this other Mason, asking if he could take the hit and keep the house calm. I told him he had to go. I'm going to say this plain, I said. If you go forward with Brent, I will call Lyle Stone in the morning and ask him to file. I will do it without shouting and without drama. I'll bring the boys to your parents to visit on Sundays. I'll sit in the bleachers at their games on the opposite side of the field. I will be decent and done. The wineglass shook in her hand. You're threatening divorce to keep me in line. I'm setting the boundary where it belongs, I said, at the edge of my self-respect. She stared at a spot on the rug like she could burn a hole through it. What if, she started, then stopped, new start. What if we do medical, eggs, surrogate? Another small breath. It would still be me helping, but not that. I understood what it cost her to say it. It meant admitting that Simone's liturgy had become her own, and now she was walking it back. It meant telling herself that science wasn't sterile, it was kindness. I will pay half, I said. I will drive you there. I will hold your hand when you wake up. I will not sit in the corner while you and Brent do what you think you need to do. She nodded like I offered a lifeline, and she wasn't sure if she deserved to grab it. Can you give me a day, she asked, to talk to them, to unwind it, to... I can give you a day, I said. I can't give you the week you planned. She left the room with a small, steady, okay, the kind that tells you a person has exhausted all their other words and gone looking for the one that won't make anything worse. The door clicked. I picked up the phone and dialed Lyle anyway. Boundaries can be promises, but they are safest when they're also plans. He answered on the second ring, voice low and controlled, one of those men who sounds like a conference room no matter where he is. I gave him the 5-minute version, the staged meeting, the texts, the plan that dressed itself as love. I expected tut-tutting or a lecture about cooling off. What I got was efficient compassion. 2 tracks, he said. 1, you make your position clear in writing. No vulgarity, no shouting, no threats you won't honor. 2, you prepare as if she's going forward anyway. That means locating original documents, inventorying accounts, making sure the business is ring-fenced from marital property if that's how you structured it. It is, I said, pre-marriage separate. Then she can't unwind it, he replied. Good, do you want to stop this or document it? Both, I said. I want to be fair and I want to be safe. Fair and safe rarely ride the same horse, he said dryly, but we'll do our best. He asked for the files. I sent the kitchen recording and the Bloom archive. He didn't comment on the content, just the quality. Clean audio, he said. Timestamps visible, preserve originals, make no edits. He dictated a short note to Harper that read like a peace treaty written on granite. I love you. I cannot consent to what was proposed. If you proceed, I will file. I am prepared to support a medical alternative. I signed it, scanned it, slid a copy under our bedroom door, and texted it to her so there was no argument about seeing it. Here's a lesson the manuals don't print. A boundary that's only in your head becomes a suggestion to other people. A boundary written, dated, and lived is a fact. Time stretched weird that night, wide and thin. The boys came home from their friend, still buzzing from a video game marathon and a pizza stomachache. I took them outside until the sun went biker orange and the mosquitoes called a truce. We punted a ball around the yard, and I told myself that whatever happened, I would not become the father who uses his kids as confessional. They're not ballast for your grown-up storms. They're kids. It's our job to be ballast for them. After I tucked them in, I went back downstairs. Harper was at the end of the couch with her knees pulled to her chest, the note I'd written folded in half on the coffee table. For a second, she looked like the girl I met at 20, so much hope she didn't know what to do with it, eyes too big for her own heart. Then she blinked and reassembled into the woman who'd spent the last week trying to split herself into wife and sister and daughter. I told them, she said, no. It landed like a dropped bag, heavy, real, audible. I felt my shoulders release just enough to know how tight they'd been. Thank you, I said, because gratitude belongs in the room when someone makes the right hard choice, even if they should have made it earlier. Mom lost it, she said, a humorless half-laugh in her throat. Savannah cried. Brent lawyered. He made cases. He cited nothing, just tone. Sounds right, I said. She reached for the note and smoothed the fold. I'm still willing to give my eggs, she said. I want to do something that helps without destroying us. I know, I said, and I meant what I wrote. I will help you help her in a way I can respect. The next day, the house felt like a neutral country. No flags, no marching bands, just cautious exchange. Jonah called around lunch. I'm proud of you, he said before he even said hello. And I'm sorry I didn't bulldoze Simone when I should have. I let her run the room. You can't bulldoze a bulldozer, I said. You can stand in front of it, that's enough. In the afternoon, Harper and I met at the dining table like 2 project managers. We drove to the clinic for a consult. The doctor had a voice designed to soothe cattle and bobbies. She talked about retrieval cycles, meds, timelines. Harper listened like a student who hadn't slept but wasn't going to miss a quiz. On the way home, she squeezed my hand at a red light and didn't let go when it turned green. If this were a neat story, I'd tell you that the day after the consult, the air smelled like fresh bread, and we made pizza and the boys told bad jokes, and we laughed too hard and slept like saints. The truth is, the quiet was uneasy. We ate steak and Harper poured a Cabernet that looked like an apology. The boys talked over each other about something online, and I nodded and asked questions and kept the topics on their side of the wall. That's another thing they don't warn you about: boundaries. The people around you can feel them like a temperature change, and it takes time to acclimate. After dinner, Harper put plates in the sink and said, "Can we talk, just us?" I told the boys to grab their controllers and do not emerge unless there was blood. We sat at the table where, 12 hours earlier, the word no had changed the trajectory of our house. "This will cost us," she said, not asking. "Even if it works, even if Savannah has a baby and we all cry in the hospital and buy balloons, there's a crack now, I made it, and even if we glue it, we'll see it." "Yes," I said, "there's a mercy in not pretending." "Do you still want me?" she asked. Not a victim's whimper, just a straight question from a person who had finally stopped trying to wrap her choices in silk. "Yes," I said again. Then I told her something I hadn't said out loud yet, even to myself. "But wanting you isn't the same as trusting you. That's the work." She nodded like we'd agreed to carry a piano up a staircase. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll carry my end." Lyle sent a follow-up email that night. He drafted an agreement for the IVF cost split and a short addendum clarifying that Harper would not serve as a gestational carrier. "Paper isn't romance," he wrote, "but it is clarity. Clarity is what love borrows when it's been sloppy." I printed it. We read it line by line. Harper circled the phrases that made her stomach flip and initialed them anyway. I signed my name and felt both relieved and a little dead, the way you feel after a hard workout that reminds you exactly where you're weak. Later, when the house was dark and even the fridge sounded like it was tiptoeing, I lay awake and replayed the kitchen scene in my head and the hours that followed. Here's the takeaway I keep turning over like a coin in my pocket, the one I'd hand you if we were talking at a diner after midnight. Boundaries are less about controlling other people than about choosing the version of yourself you're willing to live with. You can't force anyone to be who you need. You can decide who you are when they are. If you've had to make that kind of choice, ending a plan that everyone else insists is virtuous, saying no to the story that makes you the villain, how did you do it? What did it cost you up front, and what did it save you down the line? I ask because the answers aren't always visible the day you decide. Sometimes they take months, sometimes years to bloom. In the morning, Harper made pancakes like a truce offering. The boys inhaled them and dashed out to shoot hoops with the kid next door. I drove to the shop and did normal things with deliberate attention. Checked in a 911 for a clutch job, joked with Marcus about the eternal mystery of customers who swear that no one drives this car hard, signed for a delivery of filters. That's another way people survive their own lives. They keep moving their hands. On my way back to the office, my phone buzzed. A text from Simone. "You've shamed this family," it read. "A real man would have sacrificed his pride." I stared at the words until the letters blurred a little, not from tears. Those would come later, somewhere stupid, like at a stoplight when a song I didn't even like used to make Harper dance in the kitchen, but from the sheer weight of someone else's certainty. I typed and erased and typed again. In the end, I wrote, "A real man keeps his promises," and put my phone face down so I wouldn't watch the dots assemble their response. I forwarded her message to Lyle just to add to the pile. Then I sent Harper a different text. "I'm still here." She replied with a heart, the digital kind that feels juvenile until you hear the human breathing under it. I pocketed the phone and got back to work. That night we sat in the same room like people who share a language and a history and a bruise. We didn't fix it. You don't fix a crack in a day. We named it. We agreed not to pick at the scab. We made a plan that traded a bad idea for a hard one. And I went to bed knowing the line in the sand was still visible in the morning. I don't know what you'll make of that. Maybe you think I overreacted. Maybe you think I was too gentle. Maybe you think I should have marched every last person out by the elbow. All I can tell you is what it felt like from inside my own skin, like standing in a doorway with wind trying to rip it off the hinges, feet braced, shoulders set, whispering to yourself, hold, hold, hold. Hold long enough and the gale passes. That's what I told myself as I turned off the light. That's what I told myself the day after and the week after and on a Friday that came along with its own thunder. But that's ahead of the story. For now, all you need to know is that the plan changed, the stakes didn't, and my resolve learned how to breathe at a steady pace. And sometimes, that's the only victory you get between one storm and the next. The week between the kitchen ambush and Friday moved like wet cement, slow but heavy, setting into whatever shape we left it in. Harper and I stuck to the medical plan on paper. We had a consult on Tuesday, baseline labs on Wednesday, a medication calendar printed in black and white on the fridge by Thursday morning. If you'd walked into our house, you would have seen order, highlighted dates, neat pill packs, a referral list for counseling, that addendum Lyle drafted sitting in a folder with our initials on each page. From the outside, it looked like we'd saved the house. Inside, the air was brittle. Simone texted in volleys, each message a sermon with a different verse but the same chorus. Real love sacrifices pride. I learned to put my phone face down and keep my replies short, factual, and non-flammable. Jonah called to apologize twice, once for the ambush, once for the pressure that came after, and each time I told him I didn't want him in the blast radius. Savannah sent a single message that I read twice and answered once. "I don't deserve to ask you for anything, but thank you for not hatting me." I wrote back, "I don't, I won't, we're going to try the right way." Here's a simple question that isn't simple at all. What do you do when compromise has a price tag you can't see yet? Do you pay up front and hope it's enough, or do you brace for the bill that always arrives later? By Thursday noon, the group chat bloom lit up like a siren. Simone announced there would be a family dinner at Savannah and Brent on Friday to bless the path forward. Brent punctuated it with a thumbs up and a champagne bottle, which made me want to throw my phone out the bay door. Harper sent me a screenshot with a caption, "We don't have to go." I told her I'd go if the dinner was what it said it was, dinner. An hour later, Avery called from his work van. He never calls me in the middle of the day. "Heads up," he said, voice pitched like a guilty teenager. "I'm hearing Mom wants to pivot at the dinner." Pivot how? Back to natural. One more push. She thinks if Harper shows up with an overnight bag, it's destiny. I told her she was out of her mind. She told me to mind my own business. I'm minding it by telling you. I stared at the wall until the seams between the drywall panels came into focus. That tiny, almost invisible line where two things meet and pretend to be one. "Thanks," I said, and hung up, already dialing Lyle. "We serve if she leaves to spend the night there," I told him, skipping hello. "I'm not bluffing. If Harper walks out with a suitcase to pivot, I want papers in her hand before she hits the driveway." Lyle didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't advise cooling off. He asked for logistics, her work hours, the route she'd take, whether a process server could enter our property. "Best optics," he said, "is away from the house in public where no one can claim intimidation, outside her office at close of business. It gives her a final clear choice, home or the detour. If she heads for Savannah's anyway, you're not reacting, you're following through." "Do it," I said, "and for what it's worth, I hope we never have to use it." "You don't win by serving," he said. "You win by not needing to." Thursday night, Harper set out dinner like a peace offering: roasted chicken, green beans with lemon, couscous with cranberries. Foods you can eat without talking. The boys told me about a school assembly and a science fair that somehow involved potato batteries and hot glue burns. Harper's smile came and went like a porch light on a bad sensor. After the kids disappeared to their room, she wiped the counter down the way she does when she's nervous, polished, and pointless. "Tomorrow," she said, "if Mom starts up, I'm leaving." "She won't need to start," I said. "She's already mid-sprint." A flash of frustration flickered. "Why do you always assume the worst of my mother?" "Because your mother always brings her worst to a fight," I said, and left it there. If you've ever sat across from someone you love and felt like the table was a raft barely big enough for both of you, you know that feeling. Everything delicate, every movement a test of balance. You can't breathe too hard without tipping it. Friday morning, Harper, dressed like a person, headed to a performance she didn't want to be in. Careful hair, small earrings, the blue blouse that makes the green in her eyes stand up straighter. I kissed the top of her head because it's habit more than a decision. She looked up at me, searching my face for something. Permission, absolution, maybe just a sign that I still saw her as the person I married. "Do you think I'm a bad person?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "I think you're a good person who's been listening to bad ideas." She nodded. "Then tonight I'll prove which I am." I took Jackson and Miles to school and detoured to the shop after, where the day moved in the usual rhythms. Oil changes, a balky Maserati that made a noise like a coffee grinder full of bolts, Marcus whistling off-key in Bay 2. Normal can be a life raft. I held on with both hands. At 3:30, my phone buzzed with a call from Jonah. I stepped into the alley behind the shop, where the dumpster smells like stale cardboard and citrus cleaner, and picked up. "I tried," he said, his voice scraped raw. "I told Simone to stand down. She said I was enabling weakness. Harper's leaving work early. Simone's meeting her at the parking lot." My stomach dropped. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I have a plan." "I figured you would," he said, and then softer, "I'm sorry, son." "Me too." Lyle's text came 5 minutes later. "Server in place, 4:15 outside her office." A second text followed with 3 words I recognized as mercy in lawyer speak. "You can still call." I didn't. I sent Harper a message instead. "This is your moment. Choose us." At 4:12, my phone vibrated again. A process server doesn't text you poetry. He texted me a photo. Harper in the lot, bag over her shoulder, Simone at her elbow, mouth moving. The next text was the affidavit PDF, bare language, time-stamped. Served. I stood next to the dumpster and forgot how to breathe for a second. That's the thing nobody tells you about following through. Even when you know you're right, your body rebels like you've betrayed something sacred. I put my hand flat against the brick wall until the grit bit my palm and the world tunneled back into shape. 30 seconds later, Jonah called again. "She's crying," he said bluntly. Simon's furious. I told them both to go home and think. I'm sorry you had to do that. I'm sorry she made it necessary, I said, and the sentence tasted like rust. I packed up early. Marcus offered me a look that landed halfway between you good. And do you need me to lock up? I told him I was fine and not to baby the Maserati. He grinned. I only drive Ferraris like I stole them, he said, and I had to laugh because the alternative was to stand there and feel my chest fold in. The house was empty when I pulled in. The boys were still at Mrs. Neal's, which was a blessing you can only appreciate if you've ever tried to shield your kids from a storm you let into the yard. I put on coffee I didn't need and waited. At 6:30, tires crunched on gravel, a door shut, footsteps. The lock turned and Harper stepped into the kitchen with the manila envelope tucked under her arm like a report card. She didn't look at me right away. She set the envelope on the island and stared at it like it might tell her what to do next. It felt like getting fired from my own life, she said finally without preface. Then she met my eyes. I deserve it. I don't want to punish you, I said. I want to protect what's left. She nodded, pressed her fingers to her eyelids, then downed half a glass of water in one go. I was going to go with Mom, she admitted. I told myself I'd talk. I told myself I'd be strong, but I packed a bag anyway, and we both know why. Yes, I said, we do. She slid the envelope toward me. If you want a file, I won't fight you, she said. I won't spin it. I'll tell the boys I made a choice and you made a boundary, and I'll live with that. I didn't touch the papers. Do you want me to file? I asked. No, bare, honest, unwavering. I want you to give me the hardest conditions you need to not file, and then watch me meet them. There's a difference between someone who won't change and someone who is ready to do whatever the work requires. You can feel it in the room. It's like weather shifting. The pressure drops. The air moves. Okay, I said, here's the work. We sat down and wrote a list with a pen instead of rage. Some of it was practical. We signed the IVF agreement from Lyle with a clause that neither of us would serve as a carrier and that any attempt to deviate meant separation papers filed without delay. We emailed the clinic to confirm dates. We agreed to counseling with the therapist the clinic recommended, not the kind where you vent for an hour and leave feeling superior, the kind where you have to say the shameful things out loud and then do something different on Tuesday. We drafted a short postnuptial that did two things: protected the business and the house, both of which predated our marriage, and clarified how we'd handle money if we dissolved anyway. And we agreed on one condition that wasn't in any legal template: no overnights anywhere that could be mistaken for pivoting, no matter the pretext. Call it optics, call it decency, call it common sense. The last piece was intimate and not simple. Trust had to be rebuilt in a way that didn't pretend we could just snap our fingers and forget. That meant no sleeping in the same bed for a while, not as punishment, but as recognition. That meant small daily acts logged like reps instead of grand speeches. That meant Harper choosing, not just once on a Friday in a parking lot, but 100 times in smaller ways that never get applause. If you've ever had to rebuild trust, you know the most important part isn't the apology. It's the pattern that comes after. What did the person do on a random Wednesday when you weren't looking? That's the mortar. We told the boys we were doing a family reset, which is what you call it when you want to tell the truth without giving children a vocabulary they should never have to carry. They took it in stride the way kids do when the adults around them keep their voices calm and their promises steady. Jackson wanted to know if family reset meant no soccer on Saturdays. I told him soccer was sacred, and we shook on it. The medical part moved forward. Harper started injections, and I learned how to do the thing you never think you'll do as a husband. Hold a small needle in your big mechanic's hands and push medicine into the belly of the person you used to think you couldn't make hurt. She didn't flinch. We kept a calendar on the fridge with check marks that felt like hope and pen scratches that looked like battle scars. The clinic connected Savannah and Brent with a surrogate named Rhea, 31, calm as a lake, 2 kids of her own, a laugh that made the nurse laugh. The 4 of them sat in an office while a counselor drew circles on a page to diagram boundaries and expectations. I went to one of those meetings and watched Brent try to lawyer a woman who'd birthed 2 children and had no time for his tone. It was the first time I liked her for herself, not for the role she was playing in our family drama. Retrieval day came in a blur of paper bracelets and warmed blankets and Harper's hand in mine as the anesthesiologist started the countdown. If you've ever loved someone on a hospital gurney, you know the faith it requires. Faith in medicine, in the people around you, in your own capacity to be both present and detached enough not to fall apart. The results were hopeful, and then less so, and then hopeful again, numbers that meant very little until they meant everything. A handful of eggs fertilized. A couple of embryos looked good. We drove home through a rain that felt like a rinsing we hadn't earned. 3 weeks later, Rhea texted Savannah a photo of a pregnancy test with 2 faint lines like veins under skin. The group, this time not Bloom, but a new thread that included me and Jonah and excluded Simon on purpose, lit up with cautious joy. I didn't open champagne. I fixed a squeak in a cabinet door that had been annoying me for 2 years. When you don't know what to do with your hands, you fix what you can. The joy didn't last. 10 weeks in, Rhea called from a bathroom stall at her office, voice thin and brave. "I'm bleeding," she said. The clinic asked her to come in. Savannah drove. Brent turned white in a way I'd never seen. I texted Harper, and she texted back a single word, "Please." We sat in a waiting room built to be soothing. Beige, water feature, magazines about travel to places you can't think about when your life is this small. And we waited to be told what our future would not be. The doctor had the soft voice again when she said the word no one in the room wanted to hear. Miscarriage. Those consonants landed like stones. I put my hand on Savannah's shoulder and felt her shake. Brent stared at a corner of the ceiling like he was trying to argue with God, but had forgotten the language. Harper reached for me and didn't let go. And if you think that moment fixed anything between us, you've never stood in a waiting room where the thing you hoped for disappeared while you watched. Grief is a strange roommate. It moves in quietly and rearranges your furniture when you're not paying attention. In the weeks that followed, our house didn't get louder. It got quieter in a way that interpreters of quiet know too well. Harper and I were kind. We were gentle. We were careful to be on time, to ask each other if we needed anything from the store, to kiss the boys' foreheads with the same firmness. But something in the foundation had shifted, a hairline crack visible in certain light. Here's the lesson I wish I didn't have to learn this way, the one I'm handing across the table to you if you've stuck with me this far. Decisions made under pressure still count when the pressure's gone. You don't get a refund because your heart was in the right place. The bill comes anyway. Simone tried to spin the loss into a test of faith. Jonah shut her down in a way I'd never seen, a gentle man with a spine you only notice when it locks into place. "Enough," he told her. "We are done making altars out of other people's vows." Rhea sent a note that made me see her as more than a silhouette with a purpose. "I'm so sorry. I will try again if you ask." Savannah wrote back that she needed to breathe first, and I loved her a little more for saying it like that. Not heal, not recover. Just breathe. Sometimes that's the bravest verb you can choose. At home, we shifted into a pattern that looked healthy on paper and lonely in practice. We sat in separate chairs to watch a show because sitting shoulder to shoulder felt like a promise we weren't ready to keep. We talked logistics because logistics don't require your heart. We went to counseling and said our lines until the counselor made us stop and say the lines under the lines. The ones about fear, and the ones about control, and the ones about how love without boundaries feels like water without a cup. Everywhere and not useful. If you've ever rebuilt a house, you know sometimes you crawl under the floor and sister a joist next to the cracked one. The old beam stays. You don't rip it out or pretend it wasn't damaged. You support it and hope the span holds. That's what those weeks felt like, crawling under, face in the dust, flashlight beam shaking while your hand tries to steady the screw. Not romantic, necessary. On a Wednesday that would have been forgettable in any other year, Harper put a small wrapped box on the counter and slid it toward me. Inside was a simple silver band, thinner than my wedding ring. "What's this?" I asked, and my voice sounded like a stranger's. "Not a replacement," she said. "A reminder. That ring on your left hand was a promise I made and then bruised. This one is a promise to the work, to the lines we drew, to the version of me that didn't leave with a suitcase when my mother told me to." I turned it over in my fingers. It wasn't grand. It was steady. I slid it onto my right hand and felt something in my chest unlock, the smallest click, not a door opening, a latch deciding it might not have to stay closed forever. If you're watching this and thinking, "I would have left," I don't blame you. If you're watching this and thinking, "I would have forgiven," I don't blame you either. The truth sits somewhere less satisfying than either extreme. We didn't break up. We didn't make up. We did the unglamorous middle thing where you keep choosing, and each choice is small enough to overlook and big enough to matter. Savannah, after a month of quiet, went back to the classroom where she volunteers with kids who need more help than a syllabus can give. She told me a little boy with a lopsided smile asked her why grown-ups cry at work. She told him, Because we love people, and then gave him a sticker shaped like a star. Brent stopped texting me entirely, which felt like a gift. Jonah started coming by on Saturdays to drink bad coffee and watch Miles launch a soccer ball off the side of the garage until I told him to stop denting my siding. Simone sent a single, begrudging apology by way of 2 words I'd never thought I'd hear from her. Noted and understood. The cost of our compromise wasn't loud. It was quiet like a church when no one's in it. The seats are still there. The light still filters in the stained glass. But the choir isn't singing and you don't know when they'll be back. Maybe that's what adulthood actually is, making peace with the spaces where the music's taking a breath. I don't have a tidy bow to tie on this part of the story. That Friday showdown didn't end with a triumphant speech or an embrace that fixed the room's temperature. It ended with papers served and then set aside, with a plan followed and then broken by biology, with a marriage that kept standing but learned to lean against the load-bearing wall instead of pretending there wasn't one. If you're in a season where your choices feel like a series of small wars you fight for your future self, I'm with you. Write down your lines. Keep them. Make the phone call you don't want to make. Stand still when someone else's certainty tries to push you across your own border. And when the bill for compromise comes due, pay it with your eyes open. That night, after the boys were asleep and the house had finally exhaled, Harper came into the office and stood in the doorway the way she did the night of the ambush. She didn't have a glass of wine this time. She had our counselor's homework printout and a look that said she knew the difference between penance and practice. "Tomorrow," she said, "I sign up for the early morning counseling slot, and I'm calling Rhea to tell her thank you and that we're not asking her to try again right now. I need to learn how to be your wife again before I try to be anyone's answer." I nodded. "Tomorrow," I said, and it wasn't a threat this time, it was a plan. We turned off the lights and walked down the hall past the boys' rooms. Miles had kicked his blanket off. Jackson had 1 foot hanging off the bed, big as a man, already, and I felt that old ache, the one that keeps me up doing the right thing even when it feels like hugging barbed wire. These 2 didn't ask to be a test of our character. Our job is to be the adults the room needs. We can't control the storms. We can control the doors we hold and the lines we draw and the way we stand in the wind. Sometimes that's enough to get you to morning. Sometimes it's the only way. By the time the leaves turned the first fall after the clinic, the house had learned a new quiet. It wasn't the good kind, contented quiet, the exhale after a long day. It was museum quiet. We moved carefully around exhibits titled Routine and Responsibility, speaking softly so the alarms wouldn't go off. The boys thrived anyway because kids can grow in cracks you swear are too small. Jackson learned to drive and found second gear smoother than I ever did. Miles built an app with a friend that solved a problem I didn't know existed, tracking shared tools among their tech club, and then watched it spread through 3 schools like gossip. Harper and I kept the calendar the clinic gave us taped to the fridge long after it stopped mattering. I think we both needed to believe in lists. Inject here, show up there, take this at 7. When the last line on that calendar passed without another appointment to write in, I folded it carefully and slid it into a drawer with takeout menus and rubber bands and a pencil that always needed sharpening. There's probably a metaphor there. I didn't have the energy to dig it out. The months learned to rhyme. Work, homework, practice, dinner, dishes, laundry, Sunday with Jonah, Monday with no one. We went to counseling until the counselor told us she could no longer justify taking our money for progress we weren't pretending to make. "You're kind," she said, palms open. "You're committed. You're also holding your breath. You can't do that forever." We thanked her for telling the truth and started breathing in separate rooms. If you've ever lived as a teammate when you used to be a partner, you know the drill. There's affection, there's even respect, but the electricity is gone and you keep telling yourself maybe the wiring is fine. Maybe the storm just knocked out the transformer down the street and the lights will blink back on if you wait. The waiting becomes the life. When Jackson left for college, the house lost a decibel. When Miles got a driver's license and a life off our street, the silence finally had room to stretch its legs. He was 16 when his app made more money in a quarter than I made in 2 years at his age. At 20, a company out of a city down south, Solstice Systems, offered to buy his tiny empire, hire him, and pay him a salary I would have assumed belonged to fiction. He took it. We drove to see his rental, gated, glassy, more kitchen counter than I'd cooked on in a decade. And I watched him talk about databases and deployment schedules with a light in his eye I'd only ever seen on a soccer field. Jackson married Jenna, a girl he'd loved since sophomore year, the kind of person who remembers the names of waiters and writes thank you notes on paper. He finished his master's and joined Jonah's firm, sinking into spreadsheets the way some people ease into a lake, slow, then fully. They rented a small place near the office while they waited for the market to stop impersonating a balloon. I set up a trust because my great-uncle's land had set me up, and because one of the lessons nobody tells you in time is that generosity at the right moment changes a life more than yelling advice across a decade. Harper and I stood in doorways together less and less, not because we fought. Fighting would have meant heat, but because our lives drifted down neighboring lanes with tall hedges between them. We weren't cruel. We were careful. Care can be a kind of cruelty when it replaces wonder. If you've ever looked at the person you promised your future to and felt a tug that was equal parts love and grief, you know exactly the kind of math we were doing. 2 weeks after Jackson's wedding, Harper asked me to come home early. I found her at the kitchen table with a suitcase standing upright beside her like a patient dog. There was an envelope on the table, thick with papers and thin with surprise. She had cried, obvious, not weaponized. She didn't rehearse a preamble. "Mace," she said, "we both know what this is. We stopped being husband and wife 10 years ago." We tried not to say it so the boys could grow up with 2 parents in one house, and so we wouldn't have to admit the glue had become paint. "I'm filing. I want to do it cleanly. My lawyer's information is inside." I felt 2 things, and they didn't cancel each other out. Sadness and relief. People think they will arrive in sequence. They don't. They show up like siblings arguing in the hallway. I sat down, picked up the envelope, and nodded. "All right," I said. "We'll keep our word to each other about being fair." We had a prenup. The business and the land were protected. Our money had been unconsciously separating itself for years. We were the easiest divorce the judge saw that month, except for the part where 2 people who once wrote vows now wrote signatures. If you've been through a clean ending, you know clean doesn't mean painless. It means the wound closes without debris left inside. It still aches when it rains. Before the decree ink dried, Jackson and Jenna announced they were expecting. We'd barely learned the syllables of our new roles, ex-husband, ex-wife, when another set arrived. Grandfather, grandmother. Timing is rude. We showed up anyway. After the papers, I did something that surprised even me. I sold the company I had built with busted knuckles and spreadsheets and more coffee than any doctor would endorse. A rival, Arcadia Performance Group, wanted my customer base, my locations, my processes, and apparently my peace enough to pay a number with too many zeros for a man who still counts cash by folding it. 29.8 million. You can laugh at the .8. I did. It's the kind of number that makes you question your own math. Everyone asked why. Here's the answer I gave and the truer one that rode inside it. The answer I gave. It's a good time. The industry's consolidating. Better to be the seller than the sold. The truer one, I wanted to put an ending where life had given me a series of ellipses. Starting over felt less like a surrender than continuing would have. I handed Jackson the keys to the house down the gravel lane because homes are meant to be lived in by people who fill them with noise. I moved 2 hours north to a town that somehow survived the map app's insistence on turning everything into a throughway. Northville Valley, vineyards draped like tablecloths, one main street, a hardware store that knows your screws by name. No high-end European specialist in sight. I hung a modest sign over a 2-bay shop, Northville Motor Works. I charged fairly and closed at 5 on purpose. Sometimes I opened the door just to smell the mix of rubber and oil and sunlight on concrete, because those scents had been with me longer than most of my convictions. Miles negotiated remote work clauses that looked like magic to me and moved into the guest room he immediately turned into a studio. We put a second-hand desk in the basement for me and called it an office even though all I really needed was a stool and a bench. On off weeks, he cooked for us like a person auditioning to feed a small army. On quiet nights, we played card games I didn't know he'd learned. He'd flick a glance at me when he won and pretend he didn't see me pretending I still had the upper hand. If you're a parent and your kid becomes a better, kinder, more interesting version of you in front of your eyes, you know the pride that shows up like a second shadow. Jackson had a daughter, Jade, with eyes like a clear lake and a laugh that treats adults like wind-up toys. I drove down to visit and learned the particular rhythm of grandparent love. Delight without obligation, responsibility without anxiety, the permission to hand a baby back when you need to go fix a fan that decided to sound like a playing card in bicycle spokes. I ran into Harper sometimes, not often. Our town wasn't big, but it wasn't a diorama either. She started seeing a client of Jonah's, a doctor with a careful manner and a calendar that made my old one look lazy. I was happy for her in the way you're happy for someone you once needed the way you need oxygen. It's a complicated brightness, but it lights the room anyway. We learned how to stand near each other at Jade's birthday without tripping some invisible wire. Simone came to the first party with a casserole and an apology she couldn't quite say out loud. She settled for a stiff hug and the kind of nod you give a neighbor after a storm when you're both counting shingles. Jonah squeezed my shoulder and pressed a coffee into my hand he knew I didn't need. That's love anyway. In Northville, my accountant invited me to a mixer for local businesses that should have been boring. A lot of small talk about signage permits and the price of plywood. I parked near the exit and told myself I could leave after 15 minutes. Then I met Raina. Web designer, 30, hair cut like she had scissors and a plan, eyes that made me think of the sound tires make on fresh asphalt. She said, "You're the new guy who refuses to overcharge tourists." And I said, "You're the one who really runs half the shops on Main Street from a laptop and a bar stool." She laughed, and the room stopped being something to escape and became something to linger in. The next night, there was a group drinks thing because in small towns, everything gets 2 tries. As we were leaving, Raina looked back over her shoulder with a grin that didn't need anyone's permission. "Come to the Friday happy hour," she said. "I promise it won't be a waste of time." She kept the promise. We didn't marry. We did something gentler. I let myself enjoy someone without squeezing her into a shape, and she let me be a man who had learned new boundaries and kept them without apology. If you've started over, you know the joy of realizing you don't have to reenact the past just because it knows your name. Savannah found something after therapy that wasn't a replacement for motherhood, but wasn't a consolation prize either. She went back to school, took practicums in classrooms that would rattle most people, and ended up teaching students who needed a voice like hers. Steady, soft, not afraid to get on the floor and stay there until the panic passes. She told me once, sitting on a bench outside a gym while a game cheered inside, that she had learned to stop treating her life like a draft she could never finalize. "This," she said, sweeping her hand at a world of dings and dents, "isn't second best, it's mine." Brent's story, if you're curious, is a cautionary tale without the satisfaction of a bow. He tried to engineer fate the old-fashioned way with a surrogate, Brielle, whose contract included every clause except don't fall in love. He left Savannah, married Brielle, had a child, then a second, then a third. Later, when the glue holding that version of his life peeled away, tests did math he didn't want solved. 1 child carried his name and blood, 2 did not. He learned the difference between legal and fair the expensive way. The last time I saw him, he was walking into a dingy office under a flickering sign, suit wrinkled in a way money can't fix, the kind of man who can't stop trying to win a room that changed locks while he wasn't looking. I didn't gloat. Honest. I felt a flicker of pity and then gratitude that not every lesson had to be mine. Avery, the brother who warned me by phone that day in the alley, started showing up in Northville with boxes of old vinyl and a desire to argue about whether breakfast burritos require potatoes to qualify as breakfast. He'd call himself a fool for staying single, and then hand a lollipop to Jade like he was auditioning for Uncle of the Year. June and Kelsey sent holiday cards with glitter that I never managed to keep off the counter. Simone eventually learned how to say I was wrong by saying, "You were right," with a sigh that fought its own muscles. I took what I could get. If you're listening for lessons, I have some and they're plain. First, self-respect is not the opposite of love. It's the container love needs so it can hold water. Without it, everything leaks and everyone drowns slowly. Second, refusing a bad plan doesn't make you cruel. It makes you a steward of the life you've been given. Third, some endings are not failures. They're decisions to stop digging where there isn't anything left to find. And questions, because I like to hear where other people have drawn their lines. When have you had to start over, not because you were forced to, but because you finally allowed yourself to? What did you leave behind in order to carry less and go farther? Who showed up for you in a way that surprised you, soft hands instead of loud words? One evening, after a day that involved a transmission rebuild, a trip to the farmer's market for peaches too sweet to be respectable, and a call from Jackson asking if I could babysit Jade Saturday morning, I walked past the shop bay with a broom I didn't really need. The light coming through the roll-up door made the dust look like snow. I thought about the kitchen ambush. I thought about the recorder's red eye blinking like a heartbeat on my desk. I thought about the Friday in a parking lot when a manila envelope did the job my words couldn't. Then I thought about Raina's laugh and Jade's sticky hands on my cheeks and the way Miles calls me from airports just to tell me a joke with a bad punchline. The math checked out. The losses were real. The gains weren't consolation prizes. They were new gifts with their own price tags and their own returns. Harper and I aren't friends in the share secrets way. We are allies in the raise these humans we love way. When Jade turned 3, we stood side by side passing plates of cupcakes to kids whose mouths were already sugared, and Harper nudged me with an elbow the way people do when they remember your body from another life but are dedicated to the one you're both in now. She has your eyes, she said, not about Jade, but about a life that once was ours. I nodded. She has your stubborn, I said, and for a second we were 20 again, joking about how to name a future we hadn't yet met. The party broke up. Simone loaded a plate for Jonah even after he told her he'd had enough, which is the kind of love you learn to accept with a smile. Raina kissed my temple and reminded me we had tickets to the outdoor concert that night, the kind with lawn chairs and wine in plastic cups. Harper waved from the sidewalk with a new ease I hadn't seen in years, an ease born not of avoiding hard things but of having walked through them and come out with calluses where the blisters used to be. I locked up the shop at dusk, the metal door rattling down with a sound I find more comforting than any lullaby. The sign over the bay caught the last of the light, Northville Motor Works, and I liked the way the letters looked like they had always been there. Maybe that's the closest I'll get to grace. The notion that even the parts of the story I would never choose taught me how to stand, how to hold a line, how to let go without letting myself go. There's one more thing I've learned, and it's not profound so much as practical. Build small rituals that remind you who you are. Every Friday now I sweep the bay with the door open. I make coffee too late to be wise and drink it slow anyway. I call one of my boys, even if it's just to hear, "Can I call you back?" Because that still counts as a voice I love in my ear. I check the air in my own tires before I tell other people their pressure's low. It's ridiculous, the broom in my hand, the old man with a cup watching a street where very little happens. It's also exactly enough. If someone had told the me who stood in that kitchen years ago, eyes on a semicircle of people ready to rename betrayal as devotion, that this is where I'd land. Smaller shop, larger peace, family arranged in new constellations. A granddaughter with frosting in her hair, an ex-wife who isn't my enemy, a woman who makes me laugh as easily as she tells me when I'm being an idiot. I would have said I didn't have the imagination for it. Turns out, you don't need imagination for the future as much as you need nerve. The nerve to say no when everyone is applauding your yes. The nerve to change your job and your address and your mind. The nerve to admit that the version of love you grew up on was missing the page about boundaries. So here's me in a town with my name on a lease instead of a legacy, still changing oil, still being stubborn about excellence, still picking gravel out of my boots at the door. I don't know if you'd call this a happy ending. I didn't write it to be pretty. I wrote it because maybe you're standing in a doorway with wind trying to turn you into something you won't recognize later, and you need someone across town to say, "Hold." Hold until you can move on purpose. Hold until the floor stops shuddering. Hold until the quiet becomes the good kind again. And when it does, you'll know, not because the music swells or the credits roll, but because you'll find yourself sweeping a floor you love at an hour no one asked you to be there, with the door open to the last light of the day. You'll look down at your own hands and think, "I know these. I kept them. I'm still here."